start welcoming people as they come in. I think we're getting a good number here. I hope to meet a lot of you in person. I don't recognize every name that's popping up, but I'm Jennifer Matse. I'm one of the co-chairs for the Japanese Performing Arts Special Interest Group from the Society of Ethnomusicology. And my co-chair is also here, Justin Hunter. You want to say hi, Justin? Yay.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Hi. We're really excited to have you all here to share and yet another one of our wonderful webinars featuring guest speakers from around the world who work in Japan and on performing arts, very broadly defined. So we will be having a talk with Lori in just a moment, and then we'll have some Q&A afterwards. And usually part of that Q&A is another conversation about who else could we invite to keep this series going, which has been really fruitful and an opportunity to bring together people who aren't always able to share a room. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that Zoom has taught us. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's speaker, who is Lorraine Plourde, who I have known, I hate to say it, Lori, I think we've known each other over 25 years now. It's been a long time. So we were overlapping doing our field work in Japan back in the 1990s. I was wrapping up my field work on underground hardcore rock, and Lori came in and was beginning her field work. And it was a relationship I've really valued, and I've enjoyed watching Lori's work over the years. So beautifully written, everything you do. So I highly recommend folks go check out all of Lori's fabulous work. But today, Lorraine Plourde is going to talk to us about Muzak as sonic air conditioning in Tokyo. She is Associate Professor of Anthropology and Media Studies at SUNY Purchase. Her research focuses on sound and listening in contemporary Japan, with a particular focus on sensory ethnography, examining how people's moods are effectively targeted through public spaces such as classical music cafes, department stores, and cat cafes. Her newer research projects include cuteness and girlhood studies, specifically the Japanese pop metal group Babymetal, and children's music cultures. And she's going to be sharing, again, information about her work on Muzak that came from her book, Tokyo Listening, Sound and Sense in a Contemporary City. So go ahead, Lori.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Justin and Jennifer, for this wonderful invite and that very kind introduction. So let's see, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, should be good to go. Okay, right. So the title of my talk today is Muzak as Sonic Air Conditioning in Tokyo. And this is a chapter that is from a larger book project on listening in Tokyo. These are just some quotes that sort of notable quotes from the Muzak Corporation. So if Muzak makes people happy and contented in their environment, like air conditioning or a color scheme, how can it not be good? And Muzak fills the deadly silences, which is a quote that you see a lot circulating in discussions about Muzak. And then the final quote is from an interview I did with a manager at USEN, which is one of the main providers for background music in Japan. If there are spaces without background music, one feels uneasy, and he used the term iwakan, or out of place. And so this is a theme that came up in my fieldwork. So Muzak is a musical form that is born of the city. It masks, mimics, and smooths over the noise of the urban soundscape. It's a powerful example of what's called acousmatic sound, which is sound we hear without seeing its source. In my talk today, I'll look at music in Tokyo, and it's generally referred to as BGM, or background music in Japanese, as a form of sonic air conditioning that evokes the infrastructural nature of background music. Drawing on ethnographic fieldwork in Tokyo, this paper complicates assertions of Muzak listening as a passive activity. I explore how claims by sound design companies that people are not supposed to listen to BGM are at odds with their extensive design techniques that are meant to target patrons on an auditory and sensory level. And I'll also think about the challenges of using ethnographic methods for studying something as ubiquitous, but also seemingly sort of unremarkable as background music. So in Tokyo, BGM operates as managed sound, which we can sort of define as planned elements of the sensory experience of the city and its built environment. Similar to air conditioning, BGM provides comfort and regulates the environment. Yet air conditioning is never condemned as a manipulation of public space the way Muzak is. The widespread use of BGM throughout Tokyo is built on the idea, held as truth by some sound design companies and customers, that spaces without sound are experienced as unsettling, using the Japanese term iwakan, or lonely. By definition, cities make sound, and Tokyo, like many dense cities globally, is a loud city. It's been characterized by philosopher Nakajima Yoshimichi as a sound-saturated society, or otozuke shakai in Japanese. Everyday movements are announced by sound, such as subway melodies, white noise machines in public restroom stalls, automated crosswalk jingles, raucous political announcements blaring through distorted loudspeakers, and most notably, background music. So here's an image from a series of subway etiquette posters on the Tokyo Metro, referring to kind of the dangers of sound leaking. So the top of the poster reads in English and Japanese, "Are your manners in good shape?" Underneath is a cartoon drawing of a young man, as we see, clad in ripped jeans and what appears to be a leather jacket, wearing oversized headphones. The passenger seat next to him are visibly annoyed. Underneath the drawing, it reads, "Sound, please take care that the sound does not leak from your headphones inside the train." So by highlighting the social dangers of being a quote, sound leaker, this poster frames sound as liquid material to be contained and restrained in the public space of the train. Given the promiscuous presence of noise throughout Tokyo, the poster suggests that there are certain spaces, however few, in Tokyo, where ubiquitous noise is not sanctioned. Listening in these spaces should be private and controlled. The idea of sound as saturation implies a sense of exhaustion, being overwhelmed and overcome by noise. An employee of a BGM company I spoke with described Tokyo's soundscape as being filled with noise, a place overflowing with sound, and he used the term afurete, so sort of overflowing with sound. A sound-saturated society is a contentious category depending on one's orientation to Tokyo's soundscapes. Nakajima viewed such ubiquitous noise, and BGM in particular, as a form of sickness. I asked the manager at USEN, one of the main corporate providers of BGM in Japan, about this idea, and he laughingly responded and said, "What's the problem with that type of society?" His response suggests that this saturation of sound is not offensive for someone who works to inundate the city with background music. Indeed, it is the primary logic that sustains the corporate sensory manipulation of public space in Japan. So just a little, sort of thinking a little bit about the background, Muzak's official history really begins in the, really sort of solidifies in the 40s and 50s when it was used by the Muzak Corporation in factories and offices to make workers more productive and stimulated during the workday, with Muzak designed to match their energy level throughout the day. At this time, Muzak had to be unobtrusive yet familiar. Workers couldn't be too distracted by the music. And so these images are from sort of advertising for businesses who might subscribe to the services. And I just selected this snippet of the quote because the font is a bit small, but the Muzak franchise distributor is equipped to render expert guidance and assistance to architects, engineers, and other business planners. And so that sort of gets at this idea that I'm thinking about today as Muzak as a kind of infrastructural element of space, thinking about Muzak intertwined with other sort of features of the built environment. And then the other image, and this is from 1961, it gets at this discourse of labor and efficiency. So the idea that workers will be more efficient, they'll be, as they write, more energetic, less prone to error, more efficient, more stimulated, and therefore, more profits, if you subscribe to their services with background music. So gradually over time, Muzak shifted from disciplining the worker to be more productive to creating audio sort of environments in consumer spaces in the 80s and 90s. During this time, Muzak engineers came to be referred to as audio architects. And you also had at this time the emergence of competing companies like Yesco, and as well as the emergence of what's called foreground music, which is the original music by the original artist. And this is typically the type of background music that we encounter in consumer spaces or places like Starbucks. We don't hear instrumental versions of the popular songs. We hear the foreground music, which is the original song by the original artist. Muzak in Japan has a long history, starting in the post-war era, when it was used in entertainment spaces like bars and restaurants. This is referring to specifically to yusen. Much of the background music heard in these spaces is supplied by yusen, a radio streaming service similar to Spotify that the name itself translates to wired in English. And they provide businesses and private customers an extensive range of foreground music and original studio compositions, as well as classic instrumental BGM covers of popular songs, old and new. Yusen's background music tends to be in mass consumer spaces, so spaces like convenience stores, fast food restaurants, 100 yen shops, as well as bars and restaurants. Muzak's free-floating, amorphous, and ubiquitous presence has been described by some as, quote, a kind of amniotic fluid that surrounds us. It never startles us. It's never too loud. It's never too silent. It's always there, end quote. And perhaps it is this manufactured, infantilized sense of calm that incites widespread condemnation of Muzak by both consumers, workers, as well as musicians. And I want to just play a short clip of the kind of Muzak that you would hear in Tokyo, perhaps in a supermarket. Right. I mean, we could just end the talk here and just listen to that for the rest of the talk. So while there are legal restrictions on amplified sound in public space in Japan, they're largely based on sound control regulations in the US, they remain generally unenforced or ignored. As some scholars have noted, Muzak is often critiqued as either the epitome of low taste. It's often seen as soulless, bad art, bad music, or as the sonic product of control and manipulation. Musicians as disparate as Brian Eno, Ted Nugent, and Genesis George of Throbbing Gristle have all railed against the genre on aesthetic and political grounds. Yet, as art historian Hervé Vanel reminds us, in fact, since its inception, Muzak has been synonymous with inevitable progress and visions of techno-utopia, and not simply, quote, bad music. The ubiquity of BGM is an effect of listening conditions in everyday life. According to Anahid Kasabian, we're completely surrounded by music wherever we go. This ubiquitous music, quote, poses as a quality of the environment and ultimately shapes our listening practices, which are themselves heavily distracted. So we listen while we're engaged in other activities such as working, cleaning, cooking, commuting, etc. The ubiquity of much music today complicates our understanding of music as tied to a specific author and a specific location. A ubiquitous mode of listening de-emphasizes its own status as an intentional auditory practice. Music's power then resides in its sheer pervasiveness. It's everywhere. As we are completely surrounded by music or sound in our everyday lives, we no longer recognize that we're listening to this ubiquitous music. It recedes into the background. BGM company employees and sound designers focus on the moments where sound shifts from background to foreground to impact the listener on an auditory and sensorial level. Sound design techniques are described by companies in highly aesthetic terms, such as painting space with sound. Yet they're also often linked with terms of control and management. One company describes in their corporate literature how sound can be used to, quote, control the space, evoking long-standing associations of background music with social control. In Noise, the Political Economy of Music, Jacques Attali examines how music has been used to institutionalize the silence of others. Referring to background music with its linkages to mass consumption and labor, Attali argues that Muzak serves to silence everyday noise through repetition. Much has changed in the past 30 years, including the Muzak Corporation's bankruptcy in 2011 and its takeover by Mood Media. Muzak's role has shifted from controlling or disciplining the worker or consumer to something more aligned with sensory marketing and atmospherics. So here, catering to the customer's taste and sensory disposition. Muzak thus occupies a complex position in city soundscapes. The right music must be used to create the ideal affective atmosphere, yet its sonic presence is carefully engineered so as not to engage the listener too much. Throughout much of the sound design company literature in Japan and North America, music is often described in terms such as optimal or appropriate. Sound designers are constantly attuned to the effect of the BGM on the overall environment, but also on the individual passing through that environment. Background music must be, quote, easy to listen to, or kiyasui, as I was told, and should not challenge or distract the shopper or worker. Setting aside the attacks on music as soulless low art, one of the more common critiques of music is that it subliminally controls and manipulates listeners. It subconsciously leads those who hear it to shop more and linger longer. This critique presumes that listeners are vulnerable to sonic intrusions and can be naturally swayed by them. And it also presumes the effectiveness of Muzak by implying that these techniques actually work. Both air conditioning and BGM share the affective capacity to regularize the environment, and yet air conditioning is rarely condemned as a manipulation of public space. Aside from environmental concerns, air conditioning is seen in many quarters as a necessary part of modern life. Muzak, on the other hand, is seen, especially in some parts of Europe and North America, as a noisy intrusion into public space. The anti-Muzak movement, such as Pipe Down in the UK, attest to this organized opposition. So I'd like to shift a bit and think a little bit about the methods and kind of the larger challenges of studying Muzak. So in order to understand the logic behind BGM programming, I conducted ethnographic fieldwork with 3 different Tokyo-based background music companies beginning in 2011. In addition to USEN, I focused on 2 sound design companies named Mood Media and Toyo Media Links, which is referred to by employees as TML. Both of these companies position themselves as high-end sound design firms, and they distinguish their corporate identity as wholly antithetical to USEN in terms of both the clients they serve as well as the background music programming strategies. While they use standard background music genres, so jazz, classical, bossa nova, they also draw on ambient sounds to evoke certain moods. And these are often done in spaces that are seen outside the traditional purview of background music, including women's restrooms and store entranceways, to name a few. Tracking BGM listening practices, however, was a challenging process. Muzak is framed as music not to be listened to, yet this non-listening is itself a meaningful form of auditory engagement. Because the BGM listening public is ambiguous, and because those who are subject to it don't see themselves as listeners, I focused my fieldwork on company discourses of BGM listening and programming. Trying to make ethnographic sense of Muzak in Tokyo poses methodological challenges. How does one write about something designed to be unheard? Asking service workers for their opinions on BGM is a little like asking someone what they think of the air conditioning or the heating system. Despite the challenges, I did try to speak to as many store workers as I could. Employees told me they often tuned it out while at work, though they were eager to detail the genres their bar or restaurant featured, and as well as when certain genres shifted during business hours. For example, for some noodle shops, classical music is played during the day and jazz is played at night. As I discovered during fieldwork, observing businesses throughout Tokyo and their use of BGM, I noticed that many restaurants or stores play only one channel, and it's often mandated from company headquarters. The workers have little choice over what genres are played and no control over the music's volume. When I asked an employee at a noodle shop about its background music, her immediate response was mild concern. Do you hate it? She asked me. I quickly assured her that I did indeed like it. In this case, it was mellow instrumental jazz, which was USEN's channel H9, which is the restaurant's channel of choice. The worker told me they wanted the music to be gentle and soothing for the patrons, not overpowering and harsh. The volume was appropriately minimal. Patrons could sense the music's presence, but it never inhibited conversations or noodle making. Other store employees at different venues seemed baffled by my interest in something of so little aesthetic value. Their puzzlement told me that BGM should not be commented on or even noticed. Its sheer unobtrusiveness and anonymity is critical to its efficiency. In contrast, I found BGM corporate employees and sound designers to be intellectually curious about my ethnographic interest in their sound programming. During interviews, the names of pioneers in sound experimentation and environmental and ambient music, such as John Cage and Brian Eno, or sometimes Eric Satie, often came up as we discussed the larger history of Muzak. And Eno's critiques of background music as sonic pacification in the service of capitalism was not lost on my informants. And I discussed with sound designers how BGM has become standardized throughout public spaces in Tokyo. Jazz, for example, is one of the most commonly heard forms of BGM throughout Japanese style restaurants, as well as bars and pubs. As was explained to me, jazz is seen as, quote, modern and high class, whereas other genres, especially older Japanese musical forms such as enka, are seen as outdated. Jazz is seen as something that's easy to listen to, but also safe and comfortable for patrons. Many of the sound designers I spoke with were frustrated by such genre conventions, seeing them as unoriginal and uncreative. And both sound design companies I spoke with outlined specific rules concerning BGM programming. Some of these conventions include avoiding songs with Japanese lyrics, as that would be too distracting, and songs in English, of course, are deemed acceptable. Music genres are also tied to specific settings and specific times of day. Bossa Nova, for example, is one of the more common genres to hear in retail settings, especially cafes. However, it's only played during the afternoon. To hear bossa nova at night in a cafe would feel unsettling, as one employee explained to me, although he was unable to describe why, other than the fact that it defied conventional use of BGM. He explained that while it would not be unusual to listen to bossa nova by oneself at night at home, it would be very strange to hear bossa nova playing in a bar or lounge at nighttime. These genre conventions were explained as standard procedure in Japan. It's always bossa in the afternoon and jazz at night, the sound designer neatly summed up for me in an interview. These widely accepted BGM conventions also apply to traditional Japanese music. For example, it would not be unusual to hear traditional Japanese instruments such as the koto as background music in a restaurant, yet the popular ballad form of enka would never be used as BGM. The message conveyed by such emotionally weighty music, in this case enka, as a sound designer explained, is too strong for the listeners. Here, this idea of too strong indicates that restaurant patrons might be distracted by the nostalgic lyrics or the music itself, steeped in themes of longing, pain, and unrequited love. Distracted by enka lyrics, which are characterized by Christine Yano as expressing, quote, cliches of excess, patrons might then unwittingly listen to the music. As sound engineers explained to me, the sound of enka evokes an older image, whereas newer musical genres such as jazz evoke feelings of comfort, ease, and even coolness without burdening the listener. During an interview with some of TML's sound design team, they compare BGM to other infrastructural elements of space, such as air conditioning and temperature. Their company literature frames BGM as something that will improve business, a discourse that invokes the techno-utopic foundations out of which the company emerged. I asked a manager at USEN to describe the differences in listening modes between music proper, ongaku, and BGM, and he told me that, quote, music is something you listen to properly, while BGM just enters your ears. Interestingly, the term he used in Japanese to refer to the process of music listening, chanto, indicates a normative sense of listening, a process that demands labor and intentionality on the part of the listener, the supposed antithesis of background listening, which demands no concentration from the listener. For him, BGM listening should not be framed as passive non-listening, but instead as a meaningful mode of auditory engagement. Sound, in fact, indicates that business is running smoothly. Despite the widely accepted genre conventions for BGM in public spaces, BGM for the home listener is explicitly marketed towards personal mood management, does not contain these restrictions. In fact, the private listener is encouraged to draw on nostalgic associations with music, including music in Japanese, in order to heighten their emotional or affective connection to the music. And this is just an example of from USEN's website in terms of marketing to home consumers. So the idea of sort of different contexts within different sort of domestic contexts for engaging with music, whether by oneself or with family. But the sort of restrictions that apply to BGM in public spaces do not apply at home. And so they market their music for the home as a type of kind of mood management for kind of individual consumers wanting to tune into a particular mood or affective state. So the sound design companies that I spoke with often stressed to me how distinct their company was from USEN. And this came up quite frequently in my research. These two sound companies, Mood Media and TML, seem to relish their aesthetic distinction from the biggest BGM provider in Japan. As they told me, their clients rely on their expertise as sound designers to curate appropriate background music for their companies. Beyond the business strategies, sound design companies also seek to distinguish itself from USEN on aesthetic grounds. Employees often pointed out to me that they served more, quote, high-end clients. Both companies critiqued USEN's music offerings as banal, as well as the fact that its services are so widespread to be rendered almost meaningless. One sound designer I spoke with referred to USEN's background music as, quote, ready-made goods. Sound design companies, in contrast, are site-specific to each individual retail environment. And they contrast this technique with USEN's generic mass marketing focus. There's also an implication that its BGM is of a higher quality, personally selected and curated by an expert, rather than USEN's, quote, ready-made, pre-digested BGM. This sense of mundanity or the mundane explicit in Muzak was taken to new marketing heights in the 1980s by the Japanese chain store Mujirushi Ryoin, shortened to Muji, which probably many of you are familiar with. The full name translates to no brand quality goods. Indeed, Muji's overall marketing strategy was precisely to offer basic and emphatically unostentatious goods, what they called basic clothing or basic goods. Of course, in its philosophy of branding no brand products, Muji paradoxically ended up solidifying its own unique style, a paradox that can also be applied to USEN sponsored BGM that one hears everywhere they move through Tokyo's public space. The more closely one listens to background music in Tokyo and talks to those who are regularly exposed to it, such as store workers, the easier it is to determine whether the music is USEN sponsored it or not. Muji markets its clothes as basic, suggesting that its products are designed to blend into non-Muji environments. This nod to visual anonymity and seamlessness with the environment perfectly aligns with BGM logic, which argues that music should be unintrusive as it facilitates the relationship between humans and their environment. The descriptions of Muji products and its store catalog suggest qualities that could easily be applied to music. Quote, discreet, muted, transparent, understated, unobtrusive, and unostentatious, end quote. It is precisely this quality of BGM that is appealing to some listeners who see the banality and seeming lack of authorship as evoking a sense of stylish sonic anonymity. So I want to sort of end with thinking about reflections on the growing interest globally in background music and elevator music among some internet-based music subcultures. So during a summer research trip to Tokyo, in 2010, I stumbled across a CD release at Tower Records in Shinjuku in what's called the avant pop section. And this marketing category features a wide swath of genres, including experimental music and noise music, as well as ambient music, exotica, and other miscellaneous genres, such as sound effect compilations. This particular CD caught my eye as it was displayed very prominently with a write-up by a store employee that highly recommended the recording. And a very cleverly staged visual parody of supermarket flyers. As you see here, this is the cover of the CD. The cover image was awash in soft pastels, and it jumped out at me, featuring a young man and woman posing in generic clothes advertised as men's and women's casual wear. The cover also indicates, as you might be able to tell, that the item is half off and the discount will be taken off at the register, which is of course part of the artwork, but I was told by the record label owner that they received complaints from Tower Records for putting this half-off label, out of concerns this could be very confusing for shoppers. Composed and produced by musician Hosono Shinichi, who's formerly of J-pop bands such as Puffy and Sunny Day Service, as well as artist and graphic designer Odajime Hitoshi. This album, Music for Supermarket, was the first album released by Sweet Dreams Press, an independent Tokyo-based record label. On its website, they explain that the employees painstakingly composed original songs to sound exactly like BGM one would hear in a supermarket. In the album liner notes, it describes a genealogy of the project, tracing it from Muzak's familiar historical lineage, beginning with John Cage and moving through to Brian Eno. In fact, it explicitly notes that the album was released 27 years after Brian Eno first came up with the concept of ambient music while convalescing in the hospital. Described in the liner notes as, quote, fake easy listening, Sweet Dreams expresses some hesitation with labeling the recording as a complete parody. It acknowledges the standard critiques of Muzak as, quote, canned music, valueless and soulless music, while also referring to its listeners as zombies. And the latter reference perhaps comes from George Romero's classic 1978 film Dawn of the Dead, which takes place inside a mall in which Muzak occupies a prominent, if at times parodic, sonic backdrop. Sweet Dreams explicitly calls out BGM listeners in the liner notes, explaining that their engagement can be compared to a feeling of deja vu. As they write, even if one is hearing the track for the first time, it feels as if you've heard it before. And so I want to just play just a little bit from this album to give you a sense of what it sounds like. This is a great album, so I'd encourage anybody who's interested to check it out. I think the entire album is available on YouTube. So the Music for Supermarket cover sonically matches the artwork displayed on the album's covers. The music is deliberately lo-fi and invigorating. The individual tracks vary in tone and sentiment, and some occasionally veer into minor keys. However, the overall mood of the album is free of tension. Aside from the store closing track, the individual tracks are short enough such that the listener never feels burdened by the weight of repetition, often seen as a primary characteristic of Muzak. To keen listeners of Muzak, Music for Supermarket gestures to an older era of what is sometimes disparagingly referred to as elevator music, as a specific style rarely heard in North America after the rise of foreground music in the 1980s, but it is a style that's still often heard in Japanese supermarkets, shopping arcades, 100-yen shops, and convenience stores. While it would be easy to read this recording simply as an ironic take on supermarket Muzak, and to be sure there's a winking sense of parody, the liner notes force the listener to engage with questions about the ubiquitous and presumably anonymous pop music that surrounds them as they shop, eat, and consume. As the label owner of Sweet Dreams, Fukuda Norio explained to me, the album serves as a nostalgic homage to retro BGM, especially the Yusen-sponsored BGM that's heard in supermarkets. More recently, there's been a global undercurrent of fascination with this kind of lo-fi, retro, ubiquitous music, as can be seen with the vaporwave phenomenon, an internet-based electronic genre steeped in what's been described as, sometimes described by scholars as reconstructed nostalgia, or nostalgia for a time one has never experienced. Vaporwave also draws heavily on retro elevator style music, and much of the genre's imagery and musical samples reference Japan, particularly Japan during the bubble economic era of the 1980s. And this also includes heavy sampling from what's now sort of retroactively called city pop, the music genre that was popular in the 70s and 80s. I spoke with the producer of the album, Music for Supermarket, and we discussed how part of the appeal of PGM is its anonymity. Despite its utter ubiquity, it's exciting, as they said, because no one is listening to it. Similar to how the sound designers I met with were astute listeners of the city, the musicians and artists behind this album revealed a similar fascination with the BGM that surrounds them on a daily basis. The sonic practices discussed here can't be reduced to the use of sound as corporate branding and manipulation. Sound is also deeply tied to the creation of comfort, happiness, and relaxation for city residents. The unexpected pleasures of encountering nostalgic music wafting through the shopping arcade, or a white noise machine in a restroom stall providing a feeling of a protective sonic blanket, among others. These auditory experiences raise questions that resonate beyond a specific geographic region. The sound designer's framing of spaces without sound as lonely or uncomfortable is indicative of larger global trends toward the increasing use of soundscaping technologies, including not only noise canceling headphones as well as white noise apps that either serve to create privacy in public space or provide a comforting sonic backdrop while alone. The use of sound, especially environmental sounds, as a tool for mood management is also not a recent trend, nor is it unique to Japan. While many Tokyo residents may ignore or shut out the constant BGM surrounding them, there are others who see this sonic, quote, amniotic fluid as providing a sense of comfort or an assurance that things are running smoothly. And that'll be it. Thank you. That I'll stop sharing. So any questions that people have, I'm happy to entertain.
Thank you so much, Lori. Of
Yeah.
course, it's really wonderful to see the project delivered this way and with the musical examples. I mean, the final example is just, it's so playful and
I
so
know.
amazing and so Japanese to,
Yes.
consciously create a comments on the ubiquitous of this kind of music that in the
Hmm.
Catholic society and those intersections, but then to turn that into performance art.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that particular example in
Hmm.
particular. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love reading all the comments, just the ways in which people participate in how these sort of recordings circulate online, because there's so much talk of nostalgia, which is of course tied to vaporwave, which I think this recording has some connection to. But then, the very notion of nostalgia is so kind of fascinating and complex because people will be talking about feeling nostalgia for Japan of the 1980s. An American person is 25 years old. So it's
Mm,
really sort of interesting to think about how nostalgia operates in that context, or how
yeah.
the sound itself can sort
Hmm.
of provoke these feelings for listeners. But
Hmm.
it's also just a really good album.
I haven't
If
actually
you like
listened to
that
the
sort of
whole
thing.
album. I'm going to take up your challenge and do so
Yes,
because I'm
yeah. No, it's great.
fascinated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Other questions or comments from folks?
Any vaporwave fans? Usually there's some people that like that sort of thing.
I was really curious about the idea that Inca seems older than
Hmm.
jazz.
Right.
I mean, I guess maybe the assumption is
Yeah.
jazz being imported into Japan,
Yeah.
but it still seems to me that Inca is much more of a newer lived experience for
Hmm.
Japanese folks. That's a
Yeah.
curiosity that I'd love to hear more from
Yeah.
you.
I know. I thought it was very unusual. I mean, because it came up in, my discussions with the sound designers, that are all these sorts of conventions that are to some extent just sort of accepted. There's just certain things you do, certain things you avoid in, public and consumer spaces like, pubs or restaurants. And yeah, and it was interesting to think about, jazz is, for those that have spent time in Japan, it is one of the most kind of prevalent genres that you hear as
Mhm.
background music. And obviously, it's a particular view of jazz. It's
Right.
you're not hearing anything, extremely like experimental and noisy, but it's sort of like, I guess, seen as palatable, easy to listen to, not challenging, but also, yeah, some of the sound designers I spoke with framed it as something in terms of being modern, a feeling of being modern. Whereas something like Inca, there was this idea that not only would it would go against the model of BGM, which is about it sort of washing over you, but you're not really directly actively engaging with it. And the idea that something like Inca would be too engaging, perhaps. um, and maybe the sort of excessive qualities of Inca would be
Yeah.
um, just, yeah, would kind of overburden the audience or something. But then what was interesting was one of the sound designers for Mood Media who, was really great and took me around one of the hotels that they commissioned for, and kind of showed me throughout the hotel all the different spaces within the hotel where they did different soundscapes. And she was also, like all the sound designers I spoke with were very attentive to the sounds, all the sort of all BGM within Tokyo. I mean, it was kind of fascinating to get to know them, and like, because I was always taking note of it, and they were, part of their job, of course, is to be attuned to these various sounds and be able to recognize which company is providing what sounds. And she, like a lot of the sound designers, expressed frustration with these like sort of codified rules, like you can only do this at this time in this genre in this type of
Yeah.
space. And she actually mentioned, she gave an example of being at, I forget what type of restaurant it was, and it was clear that the employees were maybe just playing like a playlist from their own personal music and not, something like you sent or something. And she said it was so pleasurable because it was so unexpected. And she said she heard Enka by Kaji Meiko, so like super famous Enka singer who was you sort of gained traction in the West by being featured in the Kill Bill soundtracks. Um, and she said, yeah, that was really kind of wild and unexpected to hear that in a restaurant because you would normally never hear that kind of music. And yeah, and she even mentioned Kill Bill. That is, she described it. It sounded really hip and kind of unexpected to hear that. So there are moments where they notice things that are, I think it's just almost off the grid. People that aren't subscribing to, a corporate kind of BGM provider,
Mhm.
um, and just playing their own music and sort of things that sort of go against these like kind of rules or these various conventions, these sort of accepted conventions of programming that you should only play certain genres, which was fascinating to me.
Yeah, I'd also be curious, how stringent these rules of programming
Yeah.
are they as strict in other parts of the country?
Hmm.
All of my time was spent in Hokkaido, and while I
Hmm.
do remember
Yeah.
vividly 7-Eleven runs and hearing this
Yeah.
Muzak in the back, I mean that's definitely there, but
Hmm.
further, going east to the rural countryside, I
Hmm.
don't remember it being as
Yeah.
prevalent at all.
Yeah.
Um, Especially in my research is an Ainu thing. So being in Ainu spaces, they're playing their own music. They're wanting
Right.
you to hear things that they enjoy
Yeah.
too.
Hmm.
Um, so I wonder if, Eastern Hokkaido is extreme, but even Kyoto or Osaka, if the same
Hmm.
idea is as pervasive, or if it's really a Tokyo centered kind of idea.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. I suspect Osaka would probably be somewhat similar. I mean, it definitely
Yeah,
seems something that's tied to kind of urban spaces.
yeah,
Um, and but yeah, I think when you're in kind of more rural spaces, I don't think there's aside from probably convenience stores there,
right.
I think still
Yeah.
play
I
the
was
background
definitely
music.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, the kind of thing that we don't really hear in North America very much the kind of like instrumental covers of songs from
Yeah.
like the 90s, 80s, 70s. That's quite prevalent there, as you obviously heard. But yeah, I think
It's strange to be an American and feel kind of weirdly nostalgic for that sound.
right.
Um, I didn't know that I would feel nostalgia for it. That's kind of cool.
Until you hear, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think because it's been so long here that we haven't had that type of
Yeah.
kind of elevator music. I mean, that ended so long ago, that yeah, I mean, I don't even know really where you hear it anywhere. It's really
Hmm.
just mostly just foreground music here. Like if you go to
Hmm.
Starbucks or like even some bathrooms in restaurants will play music, but it's like the original music. It's not like
Yeah.
elevator versions of like Jesse's Girl or something,
Yeah.
which I did hear at a convenience store. But
I
yeah, it
actually
was
had a thought as you were talking,
yeah,
just thinking in Kyoto, where I've done
hmm
quite a bit of field work as
yeah,
well. I can't off the top of my head remember exactly what was
hmm
being pumped into the big long shopping streets that there are in
yeah,
Kyoto. But I can imagine I'd have to go back and think about it or be in that space. But
hmm
part of that music that's chosen to be pumped into these locations also has to market the mythology of the urban space itself, right? So
hmm
again, Osaka,
hmm
yeah, I could imagine it being very similar to Tokyo with
yeah,
a similar capitalist orientation, but Kyoto markets its
hmm
traditionality, right? It is
hmm
that's also kind of a myth because Kyoto is also home of Kyocera and home of Nintendo, home of all these
hmm
innovative
yeah,
technological companies, but nevertheless, Kyoto as tradition is so important for their tourist
yeah,
industry, for domestic
hmm
and international
hmm
tourism. And so I would be curious, yeah, to do like a cross urban kind
yeah,
of survey to see
hmm
how is this, also enacting urban identity.
hmm yeah.
You know,
No,
what
that's a
they're
good
trying to sell.
yeah, yeah, because I could imagine that there could be music, but maybe it is more kind of what's seen as more traditional kind of oriented music pumped into the streets through loudspeakers or even in the shopping arcades,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, you might even hear like Gion Festival
Yeah.
rhythms being pumped at other times of year because
hmm
that's such a part of Kyoto identity, right?
hmm
That
Yeah.
of course happening in the summer, but you might hear it in other times,
hmm
yeah, other times of year.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. Oh, we have one,
Oh yeah. Because
Lucas.
Hi. Um, really enjoyed your talk.
thanks.
My question is about how you mentioned that BGM acted as a way of like it kind of creeps up on you instead of like being in the foreground, and how that ties into with like big corporations kind of like regulate the entirety of the BGM industry. Does that kind of imply that there's some sort of institutionalized for customers to walk into a certain area because they'll hear like this uniform type of BGM in certain areas for like maybe a mall, maybe a type of restaurant, and then they hear that specific type of BGM designed for that. Isn't that kind of like
hmm
it kind of to me it feels like there's like a little bit of institutionalized where it's like the second you hear
hmm
it, you go in the mind state of, oh, I'm in a place that I should, buy stuff or eat stuff, that kind
hmm
of a feeling.
Yeah. 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 That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I think that's and then I think that maybe isn't necessarily even unique to Japan in terms of how it operates. If we think about here how music operates, and if you just think about like, going into like a mall or something, and each sort of individual store, um, you know, operating terms of a kind of sonic branding to kind of attract their desired customers. Jonathan Stern, media studies scholar, has written a great piece about the Mall of America and how sort of music is used as almost kind of architecturally. And I think, yeah, I think what you're getting at implies that, yeah, there is something about this sort of, uh, you know, corporatization of public space. And then how can we think about that in terms of sound? Are these spaces all becoming, if I'm sort of understanding your question, this idea of like spaces becoming, all the stores are all the same. These, mega stores they're sort of all the same. And then how does that sort of bleed into the sounds, right? Like, are the soundscapes all the same in these types of environment? And are they, and then what effect are they having on us? You know, I know definitely, even within shopping malls, you know, each store has a particular type of music that they use to target the customers that they want, you know, and of course there's ways in which other stores are using music in a more weaponized fashion, like to repel the customers they don't want. Um, uh, um, you know, like there's been stories of convenience stores playing classical music like outside, you know, the entrances, kind of bleeding into the parking lot, so sort of extending their private space into public space, but as a way to, you know, kind of, you know, deflect or repel from customers that are seen by them as undesirable. But yeah, but I think it is a good question about, you know, sort of the corporate management of, you know, sound in public space. Yeah.
That was very interesting. I didn't even know that they used sound as a way of like repelling customers.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
was
it's,
new to me.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's been, yeah, I mean, it's kind of disturbing. I mean, it can be thought of as, when people write about sort of the way in which the built environment is kind of made to be inhospitable to certain groups of people, especially, you know, the unhoused. Like, when, if you think about things like benches that are designed with kind of a bar right in the middle, so that making it impossible for someone to sleep on. But then, you know, Jonathan Stern, again, he's written a great piece about this. Can we think about those techniques in terms of sound? Is there a way in which sound can be used just like these other facets of the built environment, like lighting or things, transforming, you know, seating in public space to make it inhospitable for people? Is there a way that sound can be kind of deployed to, you know, render public space inhospitable to certain people? So yeah, I mean, it's something we don't really think about, or we don't often think about sound being used in that way. You know, we think of it as something more kind of pleasurable and you know, but are there ways in which sound can be, you know, kind of deployed in these ways? Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was very
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah. Thank you for the question. Are you a union student? Is everyone here?
Yeah, I'm a
Or,
freshman right now.
oh, okay, great. Music major?
Yep.
Great.
Oh, Union. Any other questions? Okay.
Great.
Well,
Thanks, Avery. I see your question, or not a question, but I see your comment. Avery,
yes.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much, Avery. And thank you everybody for signing on. Of course, this year, well, not of course, but those of you who are members of Society of Ethnomusicology know that this year the conference is all virtual. It's a move to be more inclusive to people who can't travel for any variety of reasons. So I'm very excited for that, because when they do this, we stand a really nice chance for the Japanese Performing Arts Special Interest Group to have a fabulous business meeting, right? I don't know that it has to be so businessy, but we do hope that you sign on for that, and we can certainly talk about anything you want to talk about related to Japanese performing arts at that time. So I'm happy to and looking forward to that. Also do, of course, let Justin and I know if you have ideas for other speakers. We do a blend of, or, you know, our vision is to do a blend, and we are doing a blend of tremendously different kinds of topics. We did a series of topics related to Zen Buddhism and performing arts that ranged from tea ceremony to no theater. And of course, we have something along the lines of Lori. It doesn't have to be people with shamisen sitting down playing music. Please don't think that, you know. I study hardcore or studied hardcore and taiko, and Justin studied Ainu and now is working on jazz. And then you hear something going on like what Lori is doing. So we're super open to any creative ideas. So please reach out to one of us if you have any suggestions. We're happy to take them. And I look forward to seeing people at our virtual meeting in the fall. There you go.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
Bye. People sign off.
Could you, this is Abigail. Can you just tell me more about this group?
The Japanese Performing Arts Special Interest Group?
Yeah, I heard about you through the MIT Japan program. I mean, about this Zoom, about the MIT Japan program. So just,
Sure. So well, Justin and I are ethnomusicologists and Lori's an anthropologist. But we all work in music, so it's that one big happy family. It's not discipline specific, but the Society of Ethnomusicology has subgroups. And so you're able to connect with people who are interested in similar theoretical questions or global areas. So for example, I'm very active in the popular music section or used to be, of the Society of Ethnomusicology. And Justin, I don't have to speak for him, but I know he's very active in the Indigenous studies section. And so what we try to do is get together during the annual conference and share ideas with each other, how we can help build a cohesive community globally around people interested in Japanese performing arts. We're actually a pretty small group compared to the rest of East Asia. There's more people studying China, and of course Korea is just exploding with interest right now. So we're a pretty small group.
where are you again?
I'm at Union College in upstate New York in Schenectady, New York. Justin?
I'm at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and Lori's at
Well,
Purchase.
I'm an architect, and I'm also doing a PhD in education right now. And I'm a big music lover, and I've been to Japan a lot through the MIT Japan program. That's how I'm connected with them. So that's how and I'm sorry I'm not turning on the thing, but I'm in a place where I can't turn on the
Oh,
camera.
you're
That's
fine.
fine, don't worry about it. Yeah,
Yeah,
so of course that probably came through. Oh, I forget her name. She came on when we were doing the tea ceremony and she signed on.
Christine?
She's at MIT, and of course I know Ian.
Yeah.
We all know Ian at Pondry at MIT. So there's definitely people who do Japanese performing arts at MIT who probably got the word out about this this
yeah, it's
topic.
great.
It's
Yeah,
wonderful.
and Abigail, we love having all four of these talks have had people who are not ethnomusicologists, who are not music scholars in that way. And I love that. I love that this is reaching more than just our small group.
Mm-hmm.
And the list of people who are here today, we had people from all over the country, all over, even a couple in Canada. So this is great. I love that you came. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I enjoyed the talk very much. I went to Japan through MIT Japan program when I was studying architecture, and before that, before I came to MIT. So
Well, that's wonderful. Well, we hope to see you again at something else.
yeah, well, yeah, I don't know how to get on your mailing list, but I'd love to be, if you have one, I'd love to.
I'll just drop my email in the chat. You just email me and I'll add you. It's like my college was running it as one kind of listserv, and then they switched it over to a kind of a Google group kind of thing. But if you email me, I'll get you on there. So I'll drop that in the chat. There you go.
So,
Okay.
so
All right. Well, I'm gonna sign off because I have to get to a barn full of horses. And but it's so nice to see you. And
Yeah,
thank you
keep
very much.
I keep telling
Thank
Chris
you.
Chandler that when he does a soundscape course that we should get you up for that again. Just have you come in person and do
Yeah,
something.
that would be great. Is it a class that's for kind of more for music students, or it's just for open to anybody in at Union?
I think that one is, well, that's a good question, because at Union, all our classes are open to, you don't have to be a music
Okay,
major
yeah,
or
yeah,
minor, they're open to anyone. But I think you have to be somebody who can actually create music on Logic or Ableton to be in
okay.
it, possibly. But I'm
Mhm,
not 100% sure, because he taught it once. He's going up for tenure in the fall, then he'll go on a mini sabbatical, and then he'll come back and
mhm,
we'll get it going again. I'm not worried.
mhm.
Anyway, bye-bye, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
bye.
you.
So we'll see if we can get you to come here in
Yeah,
person soon.
yeah, yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
Well,
Not
thanks so
too
much,
far of a
Lori.
drive. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
And it was nice seeing you too, Justin.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
We'll be in
Bye,
touch. Thank you
everyone.
again. Bye-bye.